We start with some Elijah Wood looking fella called Leo Biederman stargazing with his teenage floozy, as he takes a picture of something weird in the sky that he then sends over to a bloke called Dr. Wolf. Said Dr. Wolf fella then checks it out, and is so distressed by his findings that he crashes his car and gets himself blowed up real good and proper. Sometime later, over in Washington DC, an ambitious junior reporter called Jenny Lerner gets wind of a scandal about how the Secretary of the Treasury recently resigned over an alleged affair with some bird called Ellie, and the President totally knows all about it and authorised the cover-up and shit. So, thinking this will turbocharge her career, she crosses state lines looking for a controversial white guy called Rittenhouse. And before you can say, well, she should be alright as long as she ain't brought a skateboard, said Rittenhouse fella seems super depressed and demoralised about it all, and tells her not to run the biggest story in human history. Naturally, she's super baffled as to why he arrogantly thinks that a politician shagging his mistress is even that hot of a news story, but turns out she's got the wrong end of the stick, which is soon confirmed when she's run off the road by the Secret Service, and told by President Morgan Freeman that the super secret story she thinks she's uncovered actually has nothing to do with some skank called Ellie, but is in fact referring to the acronym ELE, which stands for Extinction Level Event. But President Morgan Freeman can't convince her to shut up about it for a few weeks till they go public, so instead negotiates for her to keep stum for 48 hours in exchange for her getting front row seats at the planned press conference, and the privilege of getting to ask the first question. Gah, not bad for a junior journalist who just uncovered a crazy government conspiracy by completely misunderstanding everything she was ever told. LOL! Anyway, after her day gets even worse when she finds out her dad just married a 30-year-old tart and now she has a stepmom barely 2 years older than her, she soon attends a press conference where the president reveals that just over a year ago, some dopey fella gulping at space pictures on his computer totally found a deadly 7-mile-long comet was on a collision course with Earth, and in just over 10 months' time, they'll all be squashed flatter than Prince Elrond's face. Luckily, the now transparent government soon revealed that they've totally been building a giant secret spaceship up in orbit to totally sort it out and shit. And after Jenny cheekily asks a bunch more questions than they agreed to, the president states that the comet is called Wolf Biedersen, named after the two scientists who discovered it, but who then tragically died in a car crash before they could alert the world. But turns out the president now has the wrong end of the stick, because the Biedersen kid is totally still alive, and he soon becomes a famous celebrity in his hometown after learning Dr. Wolf somehow shared credit with him in a few minutes before he died. Anyway, 5 months later, Jenny is now a bona fide news anchor and reports on how the Americans have sent a crack team of specialists, including Jon Favreau and a baldy Russian, to land on the asteroid, drill a bunch of holes inside it and then blow it to Kingdom Come. And before you can say, I think Michael Bay's going to sue someone, Jenny reports that the team have to drill the holes and get out of Dodge before the crack of dawn, because the sun striking the comet's surface will cause the temperature to rise 350 degrees in a couple of minutes, and presumably give them all a rather nasty sunburn. But worse, it'll also set off high-speed gas jets underneath the comet because reasons. So the crack team soon crack on with drilling the cracks, but one of the nuclear bombs gets jammed in the hole, and unless it goes all the way in, it'll totally fail and end up being a lackluster disappointment. Which is exactly the advice I get from my wife on date night, to be fair. Anyway, with the sun rising, one of the dopey astronauts gets totally desperate and starts jumping up and down on a giant fuck-off bomb to get it to go in. But unfortunately, they've now run out of time, and the sunrise indeed causes lots of gas jets to shoot up like a bleeding minefield. And in the chaos of their escape, the captain totally gets blinded whilst Jon Favreau is blown into the abyss. And before you can say, oh, where's Iron Man when you need him, the others just shrug and say sucks to be you. Hilariously, once back inside the shuttle, the one baldy Russian on board seems to care more about the lost American than all of his American colleagues. But they just say they ain't got the time or fuel to go out and rescue that happy Hogan fella, so shut up about it already. After setting off the nukes, however, turns out it was like date night after all, because it's a massive anticlimax that's all boom and no bust, and the comet is now split into two pieces which are both now heading for Earth. So President Morgan Freeman soon goes back on TV to tell his people that their only plan B is a massive strike of Titan missiles to blow up the asteroids. But also because reasons, that can only be done when the rocks get pretty close to our atmo. So in the meantime, he's sorted out a national lottery, whereby 800,000 social security numbers have been randomly drawn, for a bunch of lucky people to be sent down into a network of underground caves over in Missouri. Along with 200,000 elites who have already been pre-selected due to their invaluable skills, knowledge and expertise. And also their generous contributions to the President's second term campaign fund, presumably. LOL! But anyway, they'll have to stay down there for 2 years whilst the dust settles on the surface, and all the other countries are totally doing the same, bro. But unfortunately, those who ain't picked in the lottery will just have to cope and seethe, and then pray for a miracle if they want to keep doing that living thing. Elsewhere, the now famous Biedermans are promptly selected for the Ark, but unfortunately, Leo's teeny bae and her parents are totally not, so naturally, he decides to marry her so she automatically gets in as part of his family, and then he'll totally cash in his newfound fame to get her mum and dad on the list too. Sorted, son. Also, unfortunately, it seems like no one's actually bothered about this Elijah Wood cosplayer or the parents of his basic bitch, as they aren't on the list when the army turn up to take them to the officially designated safe space. And the chief just repeats that his pussy old in-laws' names ain't on the stinking list. So get your hobbity butt on the bus and shut up about it already. After going all emo and moaning to her dad in the rain about how he was never around for her as a kid, we cut to 5 days before impact, and Leo soon arrives at the Missouri camp. And immediately turns around to go get his newly wedded wife, what he accidentally left behind to get squashed by a giant fuck-off comet. No! Jenny's dad then stops by after being offended by her emo outburst earlier, and to prove he clearly did love her, he shows her lots of childhood photos of him playing with her on a beach. Steady. And he just can't believe that she don't remember all those family trips down to Camber Sands where he bought her loads of ice creams and built her a fuck ton of sandcastles. Or some shit. Anyway, after the Plan B Titan missiles also fail miserably, the smaller comet is projected to hit first around the Atlantic seaboard, whilst the other will practically destroy all life on Earth. So President Morgan Freeman just throws his hands up and says, "Peace out, peasants, because I'm heading off to my comfy bunker for 2 years, son." And after Leo miraculously reunites with his lawfully wedded wife, Jenny meets up with her dad on the beach that she now remembers they used to go to as a kid, and the pair then make up with each other under the sight of an abnormally large shooting star. And they soon get swamped by the resulting tidal wave, but not before he bizarrely tells her that he once dropped her on her head when she was a baby. Not a joke. And said tidal wave soon swallows up all of New York, including the pre-terrorised Twin Towers and also that Statue of Liberty bird, who was out here just innocently minding her own business before getting rudely drenched and also decapitated. Whilst elsewhere, our heroic newlyweds head for higher ground, as thousands of innocent background artists, including Leo's in-laws will never get to be on lists, get totally drowned to death in she. And as the larger asteroid heads for the Earth, the remaining crack team of crackers, what totally just failed to adequately crack cracks, finally decide to nut up and do one of them self-sacrifice things, and promptly ram themselves directly into the comet with the last remaining nukes on board. Which totally works, and they promptly save the butts of most of the peoples of Earth, including President Morgan of the Freemans, who then goes on TV again to totally apologise for cucking out and running off into a deep cave in the middle of Missouri after everything he tried completely failed miserably, and for somehow ending up being a worse president than current day Joe Biden.
I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
And we end on the image of them rebuilding the White House, whilst promising to remember everyone who saved their lives, including Jon Favreau, who, like George Clooney in Gravity, is presumably still up in space to this day, and that dopey bloke what crashed his car whilst trying to tell the world about the cool picture he downloaded onto a floppy disk that he didn't even capture in the first place.
What?
And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was when Leo reunited with his wife at the end, as her parents plopped her on the back of his motorbike before sticking her infant sibling in her arms and telling her to go live a happy life in that dark and gloomy underground bunker. And she just can't believe that she's become a married spouse and now a teen mum all in the span of a week. And this poor bird ain't even out of high school yet. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any visual recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time. And I'll see you in the next one.